Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Lavlett from the Social Work Action Network International Steering Committee, and I'm delighted today to have Rory Truell with us. Rory is the Secretary General of the IFSW, the International Federation of Social Workers, and over the last year, SWAN and IFSW have worked very closely together on a number of webinars that you may have seen starting last May. So, first of all, Rory, welcome to the conference.
Oh, thank you so much. Wonderful to be here.
Okay, we're just going to spend the next 20 minutes or so just talking over some of the issues that I think have been raised for social work in the last year. And so, Rory, in some senses, you've got a really nice position, a privileged position. You've got an oversight position looking at the world of social work. And I just wondered, the last year we've had the pandemic and all the horrors that's gone with it. But I wonder if you have picked up any new or exciting or innovative forms of social work practice in the face of the horror over the last year. Have you got any good news stories to tell us?
Oh, we have lots of good news stories, and there's been innovation everywhere in every country. All of us were faced with the challenge of not having any prepared plans for a global pandemic, and right from the start. Right from Wuhan, social workers were, from the first minutes, innovating. They realized there's going to be a lockdown. They have to be able to support communities. They have to be able to work to focus on particularly vulnerable communities, people that need medications and food and support and extra intervention and support in their lives, people that need that. And so, hotlines, telephone lines, information for the public, the innovation happened right from the start with any kind of planning. And of course, our colleagues in China shared that with the world. And so right from February last year, we were sharing information, having conversations, building on previous knowledge from past pandemics, Ebola, SARS, HIV. And what was really amazing was that the social work community globally worked together through these challenges. Before the lockdown spread out of China, we knew that there would be lockdowns, and social workers were saying, we have to prepare, we have to work with our ministries, our government ministries, so that when lockdown comes, social services remain open, but adapted. And of course, in Europe, the first lockdowns in Romania and Italy and other countries, did close down the social services, but social workers had the tools already, and they'd gone to their ministries and argued for them to remain open, and they were successful as people came to realize that fighting a pandemic is not just a medical issue, it's a social issue as well. So by the time other countries started going through their phases of lockdown, they had learned from their other governments, which had been influenced by social work. But everywhere there's been innovation. We could talk about it for hours.
Well, one of the things I suppose I wanted to think about is that in some jurisdictions, if I think about the UK, but other parts of the world as well, the last 20, 25 years in the era of the neoliberal, market-orientated welfare provisions, I think what we've seen in social work is a move, a narrowing of focus, much more focus on individual working, much less prioritisation of community-focused and collective responses. And again, I'm just wondering from your perspective whether you have seen that tide starting to turn. Is there now, under the conditions of the pandemic, do you see a return of the collective in social work?
Well, as I understand it, one of the sort of founding issues for SWAN was to challenge this social service policy and delivery mechanism which focused on individuals, and also to help social work understand and orientate towards an agenda of social justice. And that's been so great to work with SWAN, particularly recently, but over the years of contact, it's been really great to have that discourse and that challenge to social work coming in, and we welcome that. But yes, I would say in the last 10 years, there's been an immense change in social work. And from the overview perspective, that change has actually come about through the growth of the profession, through the growth of IFSW. We had 10 years ago less than 90 country members. Now we've got 143. That growth has come from the African nations, it's come from Asia Pacific, and it's come from Latin America. And it's actually come and complemented social work voices in Europe and North America, and the more established, industrialized, high-income countries where social work has had a clearer role for a long time, but it's also heavily bureaucratized and heavily influenced by managerial structures. So these new voices have brought all sorts of gifts. Gifts of working at the community level where there's less resources, gifts of showing how community transformation can take place, how people can take charge in their communities as a collective and move forward. And those added voices that have come into the profession in the last 10 years have really shaped and shifted the thinking centrally of social work at a global level. And so along with these gifts and this reorientation of kind of getting back to the Jane Addams indigenous cultural collective forms of understanding about social work. In addition to that, it's actually shown that it's really, really effective. So there's been lots of research to show that when communities are able to lead their own development with the support of social workers and other professionals, crime rates go down, more children go to school, more people report happier satisfaction in their lives, there's less violence in the community, and of course governments like these things. And so there has been an enormous change of thinking and the way social work identifies itself and is identified. The United Nations are now looking at social work as a reference point for social development. And that reference point is a distinct difference from the aid and charity approaches of the bygone era. It's very much about supporting people leading their own development. And it's so successful that it's now a time when the United Nations are inviting social workers to be their key speakers in many events.
Okay, I mean, that's quite interesting in terms of I suppose the community focus, the orientation, the social work engagement at the grassroots. I mean, one of the other great challenges of the last year has been the global horror at the killing of Black people by police officers in the States, and then the wonderful Black Lives Matter movement that exploded in response to that and the way it spread around the world. And I suppose another question then is, so what has social work learned, and what does social work need to learn from the Black Lives Matter challenge, the social movement around racism?
Well, I think to start answering that question, it's a really, really important question. To start answering it, firstly, IFSW has issued a statement in support of Black Lives Matter. Many of our representatives in North America are deeply involved in Black Lives Matter and have a dual role in the National Association of Social Workers and Black Lives Matter. And one of the key comments that they make is there is absolutely systemic, deep racism, not just in the police department, but in the whole judicial system. The whole judicial system, the police department, all needs review and revision and transformation. And one of the ways that social work is intervening in that from our colleagues in the United States is promoting social workers to be engaged instead of police officers in civil conflict and social disputes with people. And that's actually also a mechanism that's been applied in different countries where social workers are seen as a preferred option to police in terms of intervening in social disputes.
So I suppose that opens quite an interesting question, and in particular thinking about the States, because at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, of course, President Trump at the time, I think, tweeted one of his million or so tweets or whatever, but he tweeted out that it would be good if social workers were located in every police department. And the Association in North America welcomed this as an interesting idea. Of course, at the same time, the movement is calling for the defunding of the police. So this poses an interesting question, I suppose, about where social work locates itself in those necessary conflictual situations. Are we on the streets with the masses, or are we, doing the jobs of the powerful by softening the image of the police in the police station?
I don't think I've heard any social workers in the United States say that they're softening the image of the police. They're there to confront. They're there to confront institutional racism, and that's part of the social work role, is actually challenging, as you know, and you deeply appreciate, of challenging the institutions that we work for. So I've worked in mental health systems that have done incredibly disempowering things to people in their lives. And I've worked in those systems, and my job wasn't to soften the system. My job was to change the system and to advocate for people in that system to get their rights acknowledged and met. And I think that's what we're seeing also with the social workers in the United States. They're absolutely clear in their policy statements that they haven't supported Donald Trump, and that there does need to be a fundamental reform of that judicial and police system. I think if they see benefit to being able to carry that message on the inside as well as the outside, then there'll be a wisdom to that.
Okay. So we've mentioned COVID and the crisis of the last year. We've mentioned Black Lives Matter. I suppose there's two other great crises that we face at the present time, if you like, the four horsemen of our apocalypse. The other two are the growing fears that out of the money that's been spent around COVID, that what we're now facing is a very deep recession. So again, I'm just wondering what your thoughts about what the role of social work in a time of unemployment and recession should be in that way.
Right. So everybody's got one eye on what's happening with the pandemic, and then there's another eye on what's going to happen after the pandemic. We already know from global UN statistics that nearly 100 million people have been pushed into poverty in this pandemic, and it's probably significantly higher. That's a figure that the UN use, which I'm not quite sure how they calculate. But we see unemployment levels rising everywhere. We see so many closed businesses. We see in many of the African nations and in India and so forth, the village trade has slowed down as a result of lockdown. And of course, there's no insurances and pensions and support for people in many countries. So many social workers in the low-income countries are talking about the pandemic actually as an economic pandemic. It's far more of a concern to them than the virus. And the antidote to all of this, of course, from a social work perspective, is community development, community action, community voice. And so what social workers do in many of these settings, they apply a holistic approach to social work, which often in the West we don't get the opportunity to do. So when they're working with a community, they're working with the economic development of that community, what businesses can be developed, what health facilities can be developed, what social services can be developed, how can the relationships within the community be enhanced to unlock the potential of all people. And so, they're helping communities to protect themselves from the economic challenges. Now, globally, a lot more needs to be done, of course, and we're a keen advocate, as I think Swan is, on all sorts of global change. And we could talk about that for a long time too, but just very briefly, the kind of lessons that are being learnt on the ground and being picked up on the ground need also to apply to the global international relationships, particularly trade relationships and understandings about workers' rights, and how people should not be exploited through the process of these relationships within countries and between countries. And that's where the challenge, that to me, that's where the driver of poverty and discrimination comes from. And changes are happening at the ground level, and we hope, of course we all hope, and our ambition and our intention is to help advocate for those changes to be moved up to that global level as well.
Okay, so I'll maybe come back to some of those in a minute, but I just want to, riding over the hill is my fourth horseman of the apocalypse, and that seems to be climate change. And I suppose if you look, perhaps it's one of the issues that social work historically hasn't taken up. You know, there's always been discussion around racism and poverty and inequality, maybe not as much as we want, but climate change is starting to feature in the social work agenda, but only really starting, I would argue. And yet we've now had, 5 of the hottest years in record with the last 5 years. We have seen the livestock revolution, which creates the conditions for zoonotic shift and COVID crises in the future. And whether we're in Australia or the Amazon, the destruction of the forests and the long-term impact. In some ways, the climate catastrophe is the one that does threaten our societies as we understand it if we don't act immediately. So the final question really is, so what can and should social work be doing about climate destruction and the climate crisis?
So there are really great examples that we can learn from Africa, India, lots of Asia, where social workers working at the community level, they're supporting the community to lead its own development, but they'll ask the community questions. Are you concerned about the climate? Are you concerned about the effect that will have on your generation and future generations? And inevitably the answer is yes. So as a community, as a village, as a city, as a town, what do you want to do about that? And so actually what we see as a result of social work is in the countries with the least resources, they're doing the most for climate justice. And so communities are replanting trees, and in the process of replanting trees, we're actually, where deforestation has previously taken place, more wildlife is coming back. They're able to harvest the trees for medication, and the community bonds develop around these activities. I've been to environments, very, very low-income environments in India, where social workers have supported a community who have made a decision to do 100% recycling and have a zero carbon footprint. And so the answers are there in social work. The challenges that's not reflected in the job descriptions of many social workers, particularly in this part of the world. The more we can do internationally to say, this is the standards of social work, these are the agreed standards of social work, it enables the social workers working in the United Kingdom or in some other bureaucratic kind of structure to say, look, if you're going to employ me as a social worker, I have to meet the internationally agreed standards. And those standards now include environmental justice. And because, I think it's an accepted argument now that if the world doesn't take action on these issues, then we're in a growing peril, really. But the culture change within the profession is well underway, and it's actually started from our colleagues that have less bureaucratic structures around them.
So if I may, perhaps a more difficult question for you to speak on behalf of the IFSW, but maybe not. As we go through those 4 horsemen, then each of them seem to me at least to point to a fundamental problem, which is that these are problems which are rooted in the very nature of the kind of world we live in, modern industrial capitalism. And while planting trees and having a zero carbon footprint is a fantastic thing to do, in one community, in one part of the world, it doesn't solve the general problem. So I would certainly argue that what we have to think about is solutions that take us beyond the organisation of the present world. So question, how does IFSW, and the social workers you represent, what do you see your role in the struggle for a better world, whatever we would mean by that, but a better and more just world which addresses some of these fundamental structural problems?
So I'm assuming everybody in the conference will be familiar with IFSW to know that it right in the kind of first line of its description, it talks about having a socially just world and equality. the recognition of all people's human rights. So that's kind of right at the top, and it's at the top of everything. And we have different ways of describing this across the profession. I think some of the colleagues that are perhaps in this conference would really like IFSW to say we are against capitalism. It's very common and very popular to talk about neoliberalism, but to me, actually, neoliberalism is a kind of an advanced kind of form of capitalism. And what the world gels around is not talking what we're against, but talking what we're for. And so if you think of the pillars of the global agenda, social and economic equality, that was the first theme, social and economic equality. It doesn't get more anti-capitalist than that. Economic equality. But the world of social work came to agree and promoted that. And we had people marching in the streets. Social workers were mobilizing communities under that banner. You know, the second one, the dignity and worth of all people. The third one, environmental justice and promoting the importance of environment and community, environmental justice. And the last one, the importance of human relationships. And now this one, Ubuntu, which if we've got a few minutes, I'd like to talk about. They're all about radical transformation. It's all about change. But what we find works successfully in bringing the 143 countries together and bringing the workforce of the 5 million social workers that they represent together is, rather than talking about what we're against, talking about what we're for, it's about setting a vision that people can get in behind. And so I really welcome the critique on that. And I think some SWAN members have made some fantastic critiques on that. They would like to see stronger statements, and we welcome that. But our job is to bring this huge global profession with us, not standing at the side of it, articulating our personal points of view, but to bring it together as a whole body. And we've done that. And it's remarkable, really.
Okay, so let me just ask a couple more pointed questions, or, you know, just as we come towards the end. So the last time that we were able to, I think the last time that we met face to face was at the international conference in Dublin, a few years ago. Obviously, it was run by the 3 social work organisations. SWAN had a fringe meeting at it, but one of the things that we campaigned in advance was about the cost of that, and that it was necessarily exclusive because of the cost, and we ran a wee campaign around that. Well, what's been the response within IFSW to those, I suppose, complaints about cost and accessibility to the global events organised by social work organisations?
Well, I want to start by thanking SWAN for making those points, and it's really important that those arguments are aired, they're discussed, they're open, and it's a very good question. What's happened since? What's happened since is that we've had a pandemic, and we've now gone onto online environments, and we've been able to have a conference last year at no charge. That was the most inclusive conference the social work profession has ever seen, and we had 20,000 people, and SWAN was a partner to that, and we were so appreciative of that. And I am very keen to support a process post the pandemic where we are able to have that level of inclusivity and really live the stated professional principle of inclusion. We've got to live that. We weren't living that in Dublin. We weren't living that before. So that's the challenge now. There will be a call for face-to-face conferences, and people will want them. And if they want them, they'll have them. They'll either have them on their own, or they'll have them and want to have them with IFSW or IASSW or ICSW. But there are people that can afford to go to conferences. They live in countries where there's not visa restrictions, and they will want to have face-to-face conferences. So the key word right now is hybrid conference. So as we recognize that not everybody can attend a conference because of financial and visa barriers, we want their inclusion and their participation in a very real way, in real time, via the internet. And we've proven we can do that because we had this conference last year in which people could participate in all time zones. It's not easy, but we can do it. This is IFSW is pretty clear about this. What we've got to do is work with our international partners. We're talking cultural change here. We're talking big cultural change. Some of our other organizational partners are not yet ready to really take that principle of inclusion and say, how can we apply that to the maximum effect? You know, even if it's an online event and we charge $50 or £50, that's going to exclude thousands and thousands of people. So how do we manage that? And it is a bind. It is a real problem. As soon as you want a conference of a particular size over several hundred people, you've got to hire a conference centre. There's costs. IFSW in its history in the last 10 years have used all its surplus to generate scholarships and involvement, not just of social workers, but also of people that use social work services, because we're absolutely committed to that partnership. So these conferences cost us. They don't bring any money to us. But for other partners, that may not be the case. And the livelihood of their organisation may depend on some of the income that receive. IFSW is not in that bind because we have organisational members that pay a membership fee. So it's slightly different for us. But they're, again, a little bit like the earlier question, our challenge is to bring everybody with us. And yeah.
Okay, so that then, so I suppose just a point. I suppose this, earlier on we talked about climate change as well, but I mean, one of the interesting things about big global conferences is just the carbon footprint that it means that we all leave behind, for those of us that can afford to travel to, you know, whatever it is that the next conference is going to be. But I'll leave that to one side as one. I suppose the question that many people at the conference will be confused about, and that was that you rattled off a number of partner organisations. So we have the IFSW, we have the IASW, we have the ICSW. And in many countries, I suppose, we also have social workers who are in trade unions, which are not professional associations. So you think about the UK, they may be in the professional associations, but the majority of social workers would actually be in unison as a trade union with not direct recognition rights. So there'll be a variety of approaches. Why are there so many organisations? What are the differences and the frictions between them? What's going on here from those on the outside who are confused by this?
Well, from my point of view, SWAN's a partner organisation to IFSW. So you've got your own mandate, your belief. You feel that you've got a particular set of objectives, which may be different from IFSW, and that's great. That's perfect. The idea is not for everybody to have the same ideas and objectives. The idea is to build a common, united platform for all different organisations to be able to advance this profession, but more importantly, its impact in social justice. So, IFSW is not looking for mergers. It's not looking for that kind of level of partnership. It's really looking for collaboration and action. And we've got some long-standing partners. You named some of them. We've got some newer partners. IFSW made a decision in 2016 at a constitutional level to expand our partnerships, and specifically our partnerships with people that use services. So that's actually now written into the aims of our constitution from 2016. We treat all of our partners equally. We don't want to have an exclusive relationship with one partner over another. Sometimes there's some tensions around this issue. Sometimes there are some tensions in which people feel that they need to be more strongly identified. The Federation hasn't taken that approach. The theme of this the global theme for World Social Work Day, and the global theme from now for the next 18 months is Ubuntu. I am because we are. And it sits under a framework of co-building inclusive social transformation. And that word co-building is really important. The concept of Ubuntu being a community-wide approach where people work together, and that working together is based on the survival and the thriving of all involved. are really the key drivers that are pushing us forward. But we're in a state of change, and some partners struggle and some partners fully embrace and new partners emerge. And that's part of a change process.
Rory, thanks very much for your time today. I'm sure it's been of great interest to those at the conference, listening to your thoughts on social work in the last year and the future and partnership building. Obviously, on behalf of Swan Eye, it's been a pleasure that we have worked together at times, and the webinars and all the rest of it. So, and we'll continue to do so around shared visions of better worlds and better social work. So, thanks very much for talking to us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and good luck with the conference.